Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to our How to Be a Board Member panel discussion and mini presentation that we're doing this evening. We're excited to have everybody here. Before we begin, I just wanted to read a land acknowledgement, and apologies that I'm going to read it. I just don't want to mess it up this evening. I need to do it justice. So I want to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and Indigenous peoples, both in shaping and strengthening this region in particular, and our province and country as a whole. My name is Emily O'Connor, and I sit on the NEXTNiagara board as part of the event committee. And I also work for the Brock University Alumni Relations Office, although I'm currently on maternity leave. Tonight is our first event of the year, and we're really excited to have over 70 of you join us this evening. It was really nice to see a lot of familiar names on the list of attendees tonight. So whether it's the first time you're attending one of our NEXTNiagara events or you're a seasoned veteran, we're really excited to have you tonight. And we hope it's the first of many events that you'll attend this year. Tonight, we have 4 amazing young professionals from the Niagara region who will be speaking about their personal experiences with sitting on various boards in the Niagara area. And whether it's their first time on a board or they have many years of experience, we think that they'll be able to provide insight and important information for everybody here. So I'm excited tonight that we'll be hearing from Julie Rorison, Director of the YWCA, Sean Vanderklis, the President of the Niagara Regional Native Center, Christopher Yendt, the Chair of CMHA of Niagara, and Madison Vine, who is the co-chair of Wineries of Niagara-on-the-Lake board. The panel itself will be moderated by my fellow colleague, NEXTNiagara member, Zach Dadson. And before we get into the panel this evening, Christopher Yendt will be providing a short presentation on some board basics that will help lay the foundation for being a board member. If anybody has any questions throughout the entire evening, please feel free to enter them into the chat, and we'll try our best to address them throughout the presentation or at the end of the panel. We hope that you enjoy the presentation and learn something new, or perhaps get inspired to volunteer yourself in the Niagara region on a board. So that's it for me from now, and I'm excited to hand it over to Chris. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks so much for that warm introduction, Emily. Just give me 1 second to pull this up. So normally, just as a bit of background, I typically take a half day or a full day to do this for board retreats when I do training for boards. So we're about to breeze through it in 15 minutes, which if you're familiar with Star Trek is a bit of a Warp 9 reference. So we'll go through it as quickly and as sufficiently as we can. So in overview, what is a board of directors? Well, typically a board of directors is the representative body for the group of stakeholders within that organization. If it's a public organization through the Ontario Public Secretariat, that could be the public at large. If it's a private held corporation, that could be the shareholders. But in our industry, in our neck of the woods, that represents the members as the stakeholders of that organization. And you might ask yourself, well, what's the difference between an officer and a director? I've heard both of those terms before. Are they interchangeable? Are they the same thing? And while an officer is most normally a director is most certainly not an officer. So a board is made up of a complement of directors as a whole. The term lay director just refers to a member of the board at large. And an officer is a member of what is often called an executive team. That can include a chair, a vice chair, a secretary, a treasurer, or additional officer roles that your organization may create specifically for certain rules and reasons. At CMHA Niagara, we have an officer who is the chair of our Quality and Service Outcomes Committee specifically to emphasize our board's commitment to quality and commitment to quality for the members of our organization. The term delegation of powers refers to what a board can and cannot take off of their responsibility list. So for example, a delegation might be, the board chooses to delegate certain responsibilities to the executive director. The executive director may not do those specific responsibilities, but they may then in turn put them out to other staff people. Typically with a board in the nonprofit sector, you have in a good governance sense, one singular employee that is the executive director, and that is the only person that you are responsible for managing. Everyone else inside the organization responds and reports in some way, shape, or form to that executive director. So gone are the days where board members may have gone in to a organization and directed staff to do certain things. At CMHA Niagara, where I'm the chair, I can go into the office. I have no power or authority in the office because my power and authority is vested as part of the total board. Board solidarity is along that same line. It is this notion that when the board makes a decision, it speaks with one voice and the one singular agency. Under the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act and the previous Corporations Act, not-for-profit organizations are treated as almost a singular human being. And the idea is that a human being can't have multiple sides of itself fighting itself. It has a singular opinion to espouse on any given issue. And so when a board makes a decision, then that speaks for the whole of the board. Even if after that decision has been made, you as a board member, really that doesn't sit well with me, your options really are to either support the collective decision of the whole because the majority has taken that stake, or you resign from that space because you just can no longer live with whatever that decision was. There's not a lot of room and space for constant dissent of opinion after a decision has been made. And that's the essence of board solidarity. Conflict of interest refers to conflicts that are either real, perceived, or potential. We focus a lot in conflict of interest on real conflicts. So that is, Chris is the chair of the CMHA board. CMHA needs some construction work done. Chris submits a bid to do the construction work, and he's there as part of the vote, right? That's a very obvious and apparent conflict of interest, but there's lots of other more immaterial conflicts that can be perception-based or can be potential that board members also need to watch out for. It is your duty and obligation underneath both the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act as well as the Corporations Act to be aware of those potential conflicts, call them to attention, and if they are pertaining to you, recognize when you need to leave that space. So within the not-for-profit sector, there are 5 main types of boards. We've got 4 of them listed here, and I'll list the other one afterwards. So governance boards are those boards which are focused primarily on the strategic, fiduciary, and generative responsibilities of an organization. They have that singular employee in the executive director or a general manager or some other interchangeable title. And your focus is entirely on high-level concerns. You don't focus on operational pieces. You have staff to manage that. You don't focus on operational goals. Your goals are, or your objectives are long-term, and there is a strategy associated with everything that you do. Typically, members at that level may also be involved in fundraising, which is why fundraising boards are a type of governance board. They're not involved in any dedicated operations with the exception of that one particular fundraising piece. On the flip side of that spectrum, or what are known as working or operational boards, those are typically for organizations that are at the startup or ground level. In those cases, board members are often brought on for their specific subject matter expertise and or skill, and those board members are going to contribute in an operational way to the organization. So we've got a project identified, we bring a group of individuals who are interested in that project together. We don't have any funding yet, we don't have any staff resources. We are the ones putting those sorts of things together. And those are 2 very different sets of skill sets, and very rare is it that someone is particularly good and interested in a working type board and also good and interested in a governance type board. Typically, from observation and research suggests that individuals are usually best suited for one or the other. The last board that's listed on here is an advisory board. Those boards don't hold any power within an organization typically. They're normally struck either by senior staff members or by the board itself to provide guidance and high-level direction to specific issues that are being faced. So if you were an organization and we wanted to redevelop our fundraising strategy, we might create an advisory board of specific individuals in the local community or region who might provide good guidance on that topic as we build a plan for fundraising, as an example. The last board that's not listed on here is what are known as transitionary boards. For many working boards, though a working board can remain a working board for the entirety of an organization's existence, Often as organizations grow, develop, seed funding comes to the organization, and you bring on staff to take on some of the work and responsibilities of the board begins to delegate those operational pieces down to staff and begins to turn its gaze upward towards more governance-focused pieces. The transition can take a long time, can take a short time, can take a really long time. Sometimes boards get stuck in the transitionary phase, but it's important to note that not every working board will become a governance board, and not every governance board was a working board to start with. Some final tidbits about rules and expectations. Robert's Rules of Order, developed by Henry Robert in 1876, who was a Civil War general, developed a set of comprehensive rules in order to manage meetings more effectively. He noticed that meetings were not super well done where he was in the military and under his command, and so he developed a set of rules. Robert's Rules of Order now, in its 9th, I think, revision or 11th revision, is the basis that I would say 95% of not-for-profit boards operates under. And so it's worthwhile to get a feel for some of the basic elements that are associated with Robert's Rules of Order. One of those is, what is quorum? Quorum is, unless your organization defines it differently, is the number of people that is necessary for a meeting to take place. And so if you don't meet that threshold, the meeting can't take place. In simple terms, it's 50% plus one of the body. So if you've got a board that is 8 people in size, you need 50%, which is 4 of 8, plus 1, 5. 5 is the necessary number to meet in order to be able to have that meeting take place. A motion under Robert's Rules of Order, or parliamentary procedure for that matter, is a way in which we get individualized elements out onto the floor or the table for the rest of the group to talk about. So an individual motion, if I move, let's say, to approve the agenda for our meeting, about until a seconder also supports it, and at that time it becomes the property of the whole of the board to discuss. Without a seconder, the opportunity to have any discussion on it dies in that space, and then you move forward with a formal vote after there is a mover and a seconder. There are also other options under Robert's Rules of Order to have less formal votes, so general consent is one, or working backwards saying, is anyone opposed to these pieces, are often other ways that you can go about that. Time commitment, I tend to say that the time commitment for boards is relatively steady across both governance and working models. The difference is how the time that you spend at the table is delegated. If you're on a governance board, for example, you can expect 8 to 10 hours is not an unreasonable amount of time per month to be spending on a governance board. As just a lay member, the additional responsibilities that go along with being an officer, being chair, vice chair, those pieces will add additional time commitments for being involved in a board. And that 8 to 10 hours is normally divided up between probably a single board meeting per month, a single committee meeting per month. So that's probably 4 hours between those two. And then it's reasonable or expected practice that you spend approximately 1 to 2 times as much time as you spend in the meeting as you spend outside the meeting preparing for it. So if you've got a 2-hour board meeting, it's reasonable to expect that the materials that you'll need to read and consume will take 2 to 4 hours to do that. Flip side, on a working board, the expectation of time may be similar. It could be a little bit elevated, but the time that you would spend in the board meeting itself may be much reduced. Reading for the board meeting much reduced. You may only spend an hour per month in a formalized board meeting, but you may devote 7-9 hours to additional tasks that are operational outside of the board permit. So think about how much time you're willing to commit for these pieces, because those are some of the kind of baseline requirements that I would say. The final piece to note is just a consent agenda. In governance boards, we utilize a consent agenda to free up the time on our agenda for other generative or strategic conversations. A consent agenda just means that all of the material that we discuss at a committee level, so we've already looked at it, we've already reviewed it, and often already approved it in motions recommending it to the board, that we don't need to sit and hash all of that material again. We've done that work. The experts on those committees have done that work. And so we port that into a consent agenda to allow the board to say one large motion for, oh, here's the finance committee update, here's the governance committee update, here's the quality committee update. We've seen them all already, we've digested them all and reviewed them all already. They're now in a singular place. We have a singular motion to move and approve those, so we can allow the bulk of our meetings content to be focused on, like I said, strategic and generative pieces. So what is normal with a board that's working or transition, you'd have the executive director's report and you'd sit there and you discuss the report. By the time you get to a governance level board, the executive director's report often just comes in as a note within the consent agenda saying, here it is, I'm happy to answer questions if there are any. The couple other pieces that I would just throw out there for Robert's Rules of Order that are worthwhile to know is a point of order, which is you believe something is out of order or something is wrong within the meeting. A point of information, you're seeking clarification in that conversation about something that has been discussed. And a point of personal privilege, which is to indicate things like I can't hear the speaker, or something is too loud, or something is disruptive in this meeting and I don't feel comfortable moving forward. So those are some of the baseline elements that I would use. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the blitzest I've ever done this particular presentation before. And I have no doubt that either myself or one of our very, very talented and experienced panelists will be able to answer any questions that might arise from the presentation. So I think I'll throw it back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Chris. That was a lot of information in a very short period of time. So I appreciate you being able to condense that for everybody. It was amazing. I hope that everybody picked up a little tidbit here or there. And I think it provided a really great baseline for those that may not be very familiar with participating on a board. And for those that have experience, perhaps it was a nice little refresher of some of the rules or expectations while you're sitting on a board. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and NEXTNiagara panel member, Zach, as he will be moderating the panel with our 4 amazing panelists. Take it over, Zach.
Thank you so much, Emily. Yeah, my name is Zach Dadson, and I have been a board member of NEXTNiagara since the beginning of 2020. In my day job, I work for Chris Biddle, our member of parliament here in St. Catharines, and I also serve as the president and chair of Strive Niagara's board of directors. Strive is a childcare and education not-for-profit here in the Niagara region. Decisions are made by those who show up. By showing up tonight, you are participating in shaping our community now and into the future. So thank you so much to everyone for taking your time to join us. Madison, Sean, Chris, and Julie, I'm so excited that you have joined us this evening. Your diverse experience will provide great examples of how, as young professionals, we can have an impact in supporting organizations and not-for-profits in our community. I'm grateful that we're going to get to learn from your experiences tonight. So thank you. So I will start with our first question, and I'll go Madison, and then Sean, and then Chris, and then Julie. And to start, just tell us a little bit about yourselves. Where do you work, and what boards do you sit on, and how long have you been involved?
Thank you. So my name is Madison, and I work as the channel marketing manager for Andrew Peller Limited's Estate Wine Group East, which is a mouthful, I know, but that includes Peller Estates, Trius Winery, Wayne Gretzky Estates, and 30 Bench winemakers, as well as their applicable wine clubs. I know it sounds like a lot, but my primary role is with the estate and the tourism side of things. In addition to the wine clubs, I'm lucky that we have brand managers to do all of the product-based stuff, so and kind of cover the overarching brand. So my focus is really more on the tourism side of things. And then from a board perspective, I am currently the vice chair for Wineries of Niagara-on-the-Lake. I started this position halfway through 2020, and before that I was on the board as the large wineries representative. So only a few of us were applicable at the time, but it was any of the wineries who would have had more than X number of cases created in a year. So I fit into that category, and I sat as the large wineries representative for, I think it was about 2 years before moving into vice chair. And as of this past December 2020, I also began as, I also started to sit on the board for the Niagara-on-the-Lake Chamber of Commerce. So that was a new one for me, and I'd been a part of various events and committees through the Chamber of Commerce prior to being nominated to be a part of the board.
Wonderful. Sean?
How's everybody doing? My name is Sean Vanderklis. I am the current Vice President of the Niagara Regional Native Center. I've been involved with that organization ever since I was 18 years of age. I've held various roles, from a youth representative to everything on the executive to just a regular old board member. I'm currently as well, I sit on an advisory board for a national organization. They're in the process of restructuring and are looking for some guidance, so they brought me on to sit on that board as well. I also participate in the St. Catharines Equity and Diversity and Inclusivity Committee, so that's relatively new within the last year or so. Day job, I work for the St. Catharines Standard, Niagara Falls Review, the Niagara Dailies more specifically, as the education reporter. And I'm also currently working for CBC as an associate producer, so it's great to be here.
Thank you so much. Chris?
Thanks, Zach. So in, I guess, my daytime, I'm a graduate student at the Brock University, and am the president of the Graduate Student Association. In my volunteer time, I got bitten by the governance bug pretty early, so I joined my first board when I was 20 years old, and was my first chair of a board. At 20, I currently serve as the president of CMHA Niagara, the largest mental health provider in the Niagara region for adult mental health. I also serve on the board of directors of Brock University, and serve as the vice chair of Compass Community Health, one of the largest community health centers in the province of Ontario.
Wonderful. And Julie?
These are really big shoes to fill and follow your footsteps. We've got some awesome people here. So I'm Julie Rorison. During the daytime, my day job, I currently work as the manager of community relations at Brock University, where I'm also an alum. So it's great to see some alumni also on the panel tonight. And my board experience, I am currently the president of the board of directors of YWCA Niagara region. I was just elected board president in November at our last AGM, but I've been on the board of the YWCA for about 6 years now. And I got involved because I started as a volunteer when I was a university student at Brock, and I had a day off where I didn't have any classes, and I started volunteering at the shelter as a volunteer receptionist, and started learning more about the organization and just continued to volunteer. And from there, we started an event called the Niagara Leadership Summit for Women, which I also chaired, and got really involved with the YW from there and was invited to join the board. So I've had all kinds of different experiences with the YW, and it's been awesome so far.
Wonderful. So for our next question, we'll start with Sean, and then Chris, and then Julie, and then we'll finalize with Madison. So tell us a little bit about your recruitment process experiences, either as an interviewer interviewing new board members or as an applicant for a board. And in your experience, what do boards look for when reviewing applications? What sorts of skills or experience or industry do you feel are important? And what did you highlight to help yourself stand out during that application process?
So for the Niagara Regional Native Center, their application process is relatively simple. It's more so, do you have a passion to assist urban Indigenous people? So Indigenous people who are living in an urban environment. We do accept letters of intent from people, and within those letters of intent that people would submit, potential members would submit, we would encourage you to highlight some of the things that you're going to bring to this board of directors that might stand out. So if you have a background in HR, if you have a background in finance, if you have a background in governance or leadership, we would encourage you to do so. For the St. Catharines Advisory Committee, that was a pretty lengthy process. So what we needed to demonstrate what we wanted to sit on that board was, what skills are you going to bring that make you stand out from other people? So again, having that experience on a board of directors is a big asset to you should you want to make that decision. And on the advisory committee that I also sit on is very, very much similar. Is, are you a subject matter expert? And if you are a subject matter expert, what are you an expert in? Board of directors, for the most part, are volunteer-based boards that are willing to take on pretty much anybody and everybody, right? The big thing about being on a board of directors is that level of commitment and that desire to assist that company or that organization to grow. Kind of rambling right now. Did I miss some questions?
Oh, that's great. What sorts of experiences did you feel were important to highlight during those application processes?
Oh, most definitely. And it comes down to your experience, right? What have you done in the last 10 years, 12 years to commit to this board of directors? And for myself, when I first started, I started off as a youth. I was 18 years of age. I just became of legal age to participate in a board of directors. And at that time, it was just that pure desire to want to sit on the board. But as time progresses and as I get older and I sit on these more in-depth boards of directors, that experience is one of the things I really wanted to highlight. So being familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, being familiar with the organizational structure, being familiar with bylaws and policies and procedures, and the relationship that boards maintain with staff and our executive director and community members as a whole, are all things that are there. But then as school finishes, right, if you went to school for a subject that is relatively or that is in alignment with the board of directors itself, so example HR, I went to school for HR. That's a huge asset. We have a personnel committee that sets the rules and regulations, where as a board of directors, we're obligated to follow various types of legislation that are applicable, Ywca, health and safety, even at the height of a pandemic, right? We have COVID policies that are being thrown at us left, right, and center. So the ability to navigate that is one of the other things that we would encourage. So highlighting your skills, it's really about knowing yourself, right? Knowing what you can bring to the table, and what you bring to the table is what I would encourage everybody to highlight. Sometimes we know that when we sit on boards of directors, one of the things that some organizations struggle with is that retention. So sometimes just showing up is good enough. Not always, but sometimes. So just be mindful of who you are, I guess.
Thank you so much. Chris?
Thanks, Zach. Much to what Sean said, I think there's two components in your question that you asked, right? There's a question about, what does it look like from an applicant standpoint versus what does it look like from a recruitment standpoint? And I've been at both spaces for that. So the first is from an applicant standpoint. Typically boards have some form of a skills matrix identified and a set of skills that they might look for. There might be a half a dozen to a dozen specific skills. They could be strategic planning, finance, business acumen, all of those different things. And if they have gaps within that matrix, typically they put a posting out saying, hey, look, we're looking for board members. Here's the skills we're looking for. So when you take a look at a posting, be very attentive to, this is the skill that they're looking for. How do I meet what that skill is asking for? By and large, when we throw finance on it, the piece that I would recommend to folks when you apply, and how I was successful in the first place, is I tooled my experiences in a way that made sense to their recruitment committee. So yeah, I wasn't a CPA, didn't have a CA, didn't go to, didn't have a master's of accounting, didn't have any of this sort of stuff, didn't work for an auditor, right? But I had finance experience because I was the CFO for our student association in my undergrad, right? And explained that to folks, because the people that are on the recruitment committees are going to look at a resume and be like, student government, like, how is that relevant? Like, how does this make any sense to what we're doing, right? And you have to almost handhold and explain that piece all the way through. The flip to that is that when we are sitting at the recruitment table and we're doing the interview, the skills that you put in your resume and that you identify in your cover letter for the position get you to the interview. Rare is it, do they get you the position? Because the conversation then that takes place is around competency and fit within the board structure itself, right? And so those will be things around conflict management, about managing diverse opinions or being involved with conversations of diverse opinions. How do you handle yourself to that piece I talked about earlier around board solidarity? When things don't go your way, have a good example about how you can manage that in a situation. Like, that's what a board wants to see, right? Because one of the greatest disruptions to culture, and if a board has a high functioning culture, but they've got a missing person or two around the table and they're looking to fill that void, one of the greatest threats to that high functioning culture is a very disruptive new board member. And I, as an interviewer, have to look at an applicant, have a conversation for 25, 30, 40 minutes and make an assessment. Is this person going to be someone that wants to be with this organization for 7, 8, 9 years, the full gamut. Maybe they want to be involved in the leadership of the organization. I've got to make that assessment. And so the easier that you can make it for me as the person doing the recruitment to make that assessment of your fit with the organization, that's what to look out for. So rare, I would say, at least in my journey and experience, and now 50 plus concurrent years of serving on boards, I've never been asked skill-based questions in a board interview. I've been asked competence questions, I've been asked situational questions, but never is it like, oh, like, tell me how finance you are, Chris. It's like, no, didn't happen, right? The other one I would say, just to add, is that boards, I'm thinking about specifically when I started with St. Joe's Hospital and I joined their quality committee. After I joined their quality committee, I sat down with their chair of their board, and their board explained how, through their recruitment process, they only take on individuals if they are confident that person could chair the board one day. So that's where their threshold of expectation is when they do that interview process. So it's not that they think you want to be the chair, but they're looking for that kind of leadership capacity in it. And so when you apply for the board, be intentional about those pieces, and don't be afraid to say those pieces in the interview, saying like, yeah, you know what, I am interested in leadership and I am interested in further opportunity with the board, because the recruitment process also values that level of open and honesty. I think that answered your question, Zach. I hope so. Okay, sweet.
I think I'm next. You want me to
Oh,
go?
yes. Sorry. Yeah, Chris, thank you so much. And Julie, sorry, I thought I was on not muted. Julia, can you share your experiences?
Yeah, happy to. These are all really good points. So I'm going to try and not repeat the same things, both from Sean and Chris. And that's easy for me because when I talk about the YWCA, the YW is pretty unique in that our board is an all women's board. So one of the first criteria that we look for is that lived experience, because we are a women's organization, we are a feminist organization. And so we really want to look for folks whose values and experience match the services and the vision that we provide in the community. So that's really important. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about your passion and interests and how that aligns. But for us, that's front and center. It's really important and unique. And I think that makes the culture of our board pretty unique as well. So it's been a really cool experience. I don't think you can look around to too many boards and see a table full of women. Sometimes you don't even see any women or people of color, marginalized folks around the table of an organization that is serving those folks. So it's special and it's important. And we also have a policy that across Canada, so YWCA is a part of a movement of YWs all across Canada and really around the world. And in Canada, all of our member organizations, we have a policy that we want to recruit young people under 30, and we have a target of 30% or more young people under 30 on our board. And so when we're talking about matrices, we're obviously looking for a diversity of skills, but we're also looking for a diversity of experiences, of life experiences. So not just your professional experiences, but who you are as a person. And that includes a young person's perspective. So I think that's really important, especially as we're talking to a group of young folks, professional folks, NEXTNiagara, to know that your voice and your perspective as a younger person is hugely valuable and important to boards, and that we're always looking for your perspective. And that, just because we are younger, I'm maybe being a little liberal with that term here, but because we're younger and newer to our professional careers, that's not to say that our experiences are any less valuable, because like I said, we want to build a board and an organization that reflects the people that we serve. And oftentimes those are younger folks. So it's very important to us. So as Chris talked about, as Sean talked about, boards, when you're thinking about applying, highlight your professional skills, but much like I would do in a job interview as well, when I'm looking to match my skills and experiences for what the position is looking for, making those matches, I will also draw on my volunteer experiences and life experiences as well, not just what I get paid to do, but where I've developed other skills too. And I would do the same thing when applying for a board. And I absolutely have. And I always draw on my YWCA volunteer experience when applying for jobs and things like that as well. So it works both ways. And I absolutely say to draw on your unpaid work and professional experience when thinking about applying to a board. We definitely need those diverse skills, those professional skills, but the life experience is hugely valuable, especially like many of us are representing here not-for-profit organizations in the service sector, and that's important. So don't undervalue that. And that's something that we, in a respectful way, want to engage folks in a level of their comfort when we're having interviews. How much are you willing to share, and what are you willing to bring to the table aside from your professional skills and connections and networks? What else can you bring to the table from your life?
Thank you so much, Julie. I remember the first time that I had applied to be on a board of directors, I was nervous that I didn't feel like I had a lot of professional experience in my career. And they really reminded me in that process, like you had said, about being a young person and providing that young perspective is a really important part of having a new and diverse view to share. And so I think that is not a weakness. I think that can often be a strength. And so thanks so much for highlighting that. Madison, can you share your experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, in most of the roles that I have applied to, it's been a nomination process. So I've either self-nominated or someone has nominated me. And then from there, there's an application and I would fill in what skills I have that are applicable, and kind of echoing what everyone has said at this point. It's a lot of pulling from, perhaps I'm looking at something in finance, and I'm also not an accountant, so I've pulled from other experiences that I had where I did work with a budget, or I did do something that was finance related, and how I can use those skills to work within the organization. So I am trying to fill that gap. And when I'm applying, I'm adjusting my resume as if I were applying to a job. So I'm highlighting any of the skills that I think would be relevant to that position. In the roles that I have been a part of or am a part of, a lot of times you are filling a specific gap. So I mentioned earlier that my initial start with Wineries of Niagara-on-the-Lake, I was on the board of directors representing the large wineries. So for me, that was a requirement when I was putting my name into the ring for the board of directors, was I had to be part of a large winery. And we also have a spot for small wineries and all different types of people to fit kind of the overarching committee as a whole. So we want to make sure that there is a diverse number of people on the board who have different skill sets or different kind of backgrounds that they can bring to the table and represent to I guess, fill the committee as a whole. And when it came to me, like for me, for the application process, I've had different kind of experiences after that nomination step. So when I started with the Brock Student Alumni Association, and I knew I wanted to be on the board there was a couple of us who had been nominated or self-nominated for one of the positions on the board. And then we had to kind of make a case for ourselves. And then it was a vote from there. So essentially it was almost like a debate, like what makes me better than this person next to me? What skills do I have that maybe supersede and kind of fill in the gaps that are there right now? And then Wineries of Niagara-on-the-Lake, there wasn't really any other large wineries who had applied at the time. So I kind of got lucky and got my foot in. And then with the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce in Niagara-on-the-Lake, I actually didn't know that I was nominated. And then I was on the board and it was like, oh, I had 3 people congratulate me. And I'm like, I had to call my contact at the chamber and I'm like, how did this happen? So I've had a couple of different experiences when it comes to the actual application process. And then on the hiring side of it, I would say what really, in my opinion, what really stands out with most people, yes, those diverse skills and what gaps you can fill, but also the passion. If you have a passion for whatever you're working on or whatever board you're trying to apply to, like that just shines. Like a lot of these skills can be learned. So if you have that passion, it shows you're going to be committed to learning and acquiring the skills that are needed. But the passion really makes you kind of that front runner in my eyes, at least, because I can see that if you're excited about this and it's something that you really want to do and really want to prove, you'll be more active in learning those skills that are required.
Thank you so much. So for our next question, we'll start with Chris, and then we'll go to Julie, Madison, and then we'll end with Sean. So if you could take yourself back to that very first board meeting, that the first time that you had joined a board of directors, I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about how your experience sort of matched with your expectations, and what sorts of things did you learn in those first kind of board meetings that you didn't really think about, or things that you hadn't anticipated would be an important part of sitting on a board at that time. Chris?
So I didn't know anything about anything, which I think might describe many people in their early 20s, but my goodness, did I not know anything about anything. And when I first joined my first board, I really had no idea of what a board was, what a board was responsible for, or ultimately what a board was liable for, right? I didn't understand, oh, there's insurance for directors because you could get sued for something if something went awry. Like, had no concept about any of these pieces, right? Was a second year undergraduate student and just thought that, hey, there was an opportunity here, and I jumped on it and was successful. I think the big piece that I would take away from that, and it probably gets into one of the other questions that you want to ask, Zach, is around purpose and intent, right? So why do you get involved with which things, and what's the motivation for doing it? And I think I spent a lot of time, probably my early 20s, getting involved in community projects or on boards for things where I saw that there was an opportunity and I wanted to get involved with that thing. And I wasn't particularly passionate about that specific topic, but I got bitten by the board bug, and I decided I had to, I wanted to keep getting involved in these things, but I didn't have that same level of intention around which things I got involved in. I mean, if you consider the wonderful phrasing by the poet laureate Gandalf the Grey, right? Like, all we have to do with the time that is given to us is choose what we do with our time. And so in that sense, I wasn't very intentional in how I spent that time. I think the thing I would say to folks is identify what your personal, like, organizations have mission, vision, values, identify what your personal mission, vision, and values are, right? It took me a long time to figure out that my personal mission is to plant seeds for trees I'll never sit under. And that in and of itself galvanized what I would go out and do and what I would go be involved with. So I see a board opportunity, or my contacts recommend me a board opportunity. I look at it, does it fit that idea? Right? My vision is to curate gardens that I'll never enjoy. Does it fit this mission and vision that I've developed for myself, right? And I think doing that and being able to be intentional avoids that pain that I had at the beginning, where you just sat in meetings and you weren't really sure why am I here, what am I doing, what am I contributing to this thing. And there's nothing, especially in the not-for-profit sector, there's nothing more demoralizing than having all of this passion to be involved and do something, and then you get involved in these spaces and then you sit there for 2 hours on a Thursday night going, why am I here? We're pawing over financial statements. I don't know what this means. What are qualifiers? Why do I want to do this, right? And so suddenly, that can be more detrimental to your long-term board or involvement journey, because it sets you back a pace because you have a bad experience and you don't want to keep going forward. So I think it's much more beneficial for folks if you can learn from that mistake and say, you know what, I'm going to identify what I want to do first, what my passion is first, what I want to contribute to the community first. And then I can screen opportunities. And so I'm not going to jump at everyone that comes along like I so mistakenly did. And frankly, still sometimes do, because I see an opportunity. I think that that's a fun idea, but you can have a much more meaningful journey through nonprofit governance by doing that than just jump. Oh, I want to be on a board. Oh, here's a board and I'm going to jump on it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Chris. Julie?
That's awesome, Chris. And I just have to give you some kudos here, because Chris and I go way back to like 2012, maybe 2011, like way back to our RILA days, Chris. And I was always inspired by you and your bravery to just be like, I'm going to join that board. I'm going to raise my hand. And I was always too chicken, because I was like, I don't know the procedures. I don't know what I'm doing. And then I met Chris and I was like, yeah, I can do it. So it's great to continue to learn from you. What did I learn from my
just to say, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Anybody can throw their hand up. If I figured out how to do it, anybody can. So
totally. I would just say I've learned a lot, and there have been some sticky moments, but I would say the first thing is that don't be shy to ask the question, because the chances are, if you're thinking and wondering about something, especially when it comes to procedures or financials, chances are that someone else is wondering the same thing. and somebody needs to ask the question, and don't be afraid to do it, because that's your job, right? And sometimes what has been challenging to keep perspective, and especially when times can get a little bit choppy, is that your job is governance and not operations, right? Like, we're talking about governance boards here for the most part, although Chris in his intro presentation did give some different examples. We're really talking about governance and being that strategic decision maker, guiding the ship, not rowing it, right? And that can be challenging, especially when you're coming in as a new board member, to get that footing of what your role is versus what the staff's role is, and how and where you should be involved. And I would say another positive lesson that I have learned, and I was talking about this with one of my other fellow board members a little while ago, is that you know, for many of us, especially if it's your first time coming in, our experiences, especially in a workplace, are in a hierarchical situation where you have a boss, you're an employee, you report to someone, you take direction. Where in a board setting, you're sitting around a board table, you're all equals, you're all directors, and you all have the same decision-making power, authority, or lack thereof, really. And that really levels the playing field. So that can really help you get more comfortable with speaking up, with asking questions in a group setting. And that can be transferable to other settings, like in the workplace too, to feel more comfortable speaking up, to asking questions, public speaking, because you're all equals and you're all directors. And especially being the young person in the room, and sometimes maybe you're the only woman, maybe you're the only young person, that can be an equalizer for you and give you some opportunities that you maybe wouldn't otherwise have. So some good lessons. Sometimes they're challenging and push you a little bit outside of your comfort zone, but that's where growth comes, right? So ask the question.
Thank you so much. Madison?
As I had mentioned, my first board experience was with the Student Alumni Association at Brock, and I was lucky in that my role actually allowed me to sit as a visiting member of the Alumni Association when they had their board meetings, committee meetings. So it was kind of a cool insight for me, and I was able to meet people there. And Emily, when we first got on as panelists, she had mentioned that that my name came up a lot back then, and even now those people who mentioned my name back then are still references for me now. So I think what I learned going into my first kind of board experience was that you're building your network, and you're meeting these people who will likely, Niagara's a pretty small region. As big as it might seem, it's pretty small, and those people you'll see throughout your entire career. And even to this day, those people are still references for me, or will still reach out with opportunities for me. So I think that was the biggest and the coolest lesson for me. I didn't really expect that. To Chris's point, I had no idea what I was doing. I wanted to get involved, and so I did. And I learned a lot, and I don't think I had any true expectations, and it obviously exceeded any expectations I may have had, because I've continued to join boards since then. And typically it's things that do excite me, or roles that excite me. Or sometimes it's experiences that I think will help me grow as a person, and ultimately help thrust me forward within my career.
Awesome. Sean, can you take us back to when you were 18 joining the Niagara Regional Native Center Board?
Yeah, it was very much like Chris. Like, I have no clue what I'm doing. I'm 18 years of age, just graduated high school, and everybody put my name forward. And one of the things that you need to understand is that it is fundamentally okay to make a mistake, right? Being 18 years of age, what we know now is that boards of directors get their power as a collective. So as an individual, if you have a question, or you want to make a motion, or you want to do something of that sort, and you do it in an improper way that it may be contrary to Robert's Rules of Order, that is okay, because everybody is going to correct you. Everybody's going to point you in the right direction. But what became apparent to me is the importance of Robert's Rules of Order, is how to guide these meetings and how to guide these meetings in a timely fashion. Depending on the level of board that you have participated in or are participating in, can determine the quality of the board itself. Like I have memories or nightmares of going to a not-for-profit board and being there until 12 o'clock at night, simply because we lack that process and we lack that guidance. So one of the things I again quickly learned is the importance of Robert's Rules of Order. And once you get that knowledge, once you have that foundational understanding of how to chair a meeting or how a meeting should progress in an orderly fashion, it becomes fun, right? One of the things that we know is knowledge is power. So be young, make mistakes, have fun, and just go with it. Because the longer you're on a board, or the longer you serve or put yourself forward to serve on the board, the more knowledge you get, the more opportunities present themselves to you, right? We're sitting here, 4 young individuals from varying organizations, having the opportunity to speak to potentially other board members too. So it's a good time to be young. It's a good time to be on a board. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. So for our next question, we'll start with Julie, and then we'll go to Madison, Sean, and then Chris. And Chris, you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, in the last question too, but can you talk about the importance or how important you think it is to find boards that align with your passions and maximize your skill sets, opposed to kind of just searching for that opportunity to get that leadership experience?
Well, I think a lot of us have talked about kind of both experiences, right? Whether you're looking for growth and learning and developing a new skill set, that's one way to consider an opportunity. And the other is really, it's something that you care about personally. And I like what Chris was just saying about, planting seeds and for trees that I'm not saying it nearly as eloquently, but he's planting a garden and we'll watch it grow and flourish for generations, right? And knowing what your passion and knowing what your purpose is, because I think that, we've also talked about the time commitment, and we've had some long meetings as well. And sometimes that's necessary. And if you don't care, if you're really not aligned with the vision and the values and the purpose of the organization, then that's going to be difficult. And, we've also talked about time commitment in the sense of a term, not just time commitment for monthly meetings, but in order for that organization to succeed, we need to have a commitment of board members, not just for the night, but for the longer term, to learn, to grow, and commit to the organization and the governance as well. So I can't imagine doing something for free that you don't care about. I think that passion is critical to also informing your decision-making and how you're going to lead, because that's really, you are in a leadership and a decision-making role to set the strategy and the direction and the policy for an organization. And you really have got to think about how your values and your interests align in order to do what's best for that organization. So absolutely, it's important that your values, you have some passion for sure.
Thank you so much, Madison.
Yeah, I mean, I said it before and I'll say it again. I do think that passion does play a role, especially to Julie's point. Like if it's something that you're spending your free time doing, you want to make sure that it is something that you do want to see succeed. Otherwise, you end up only coming for the meeting and then things start to fall off and it ends up a bit messy. But I think what I've found most exciting in a lot of the boards that I've sat on is the people who are the most passionate are typically the ones that speak up, and you'll end up with a lot of sometimes differing opinions, and sometimes like maybe what you think is the best direction you don't necessarily see move ahead, but that also provides you with the opportunity to see things through a different set of eyes. So maybe I kind of have a one-track mind with my winery background, and then a couple of my colleagues at the Chamber of Commerce have their differing backgrounds, and so their sights are set in a little bit of a different direction. So we kind of get to collaborate in that way. And again, the passion really fuels those conversations, and it's been the most fun experiences that I've had is when people are passionate about what they're doing, and then really maximizing those skill sets that they do have, and the backgrounds that they do have, and the diversity that we all can bring to the table in order to have the best possible outcome for whichever board we're sitting on.
Awesome. Thank you, Madison. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, very much the same. You're making a decision to change or to create that fundamental change when you accept a position on a board of directors. So whatever that organization might be, or whatever the mission and mandate of that is you're agreeing to that. For me, one of the important things is again understanding what you're getting yourself into, that time commitment that does exist. Because oftentimes what will happen is boards of directors will say that, oh, it's a monthly commitment, right? You'll meet once a month, approximately 3 hours, and that is that. Then you get on the board of directors and you realize that, hey, there's committee meetings that you need to attend to, or hey, you may need to sign off on checks, or so something to that effect, right? So that 3 to 4 hour a month time commitment that you've vested in has now transitioned into 12 to 20 hours potentially, right? So understanding what you're getting yourself into, as well as the, like Julie said, the term commitment itself. Some of these boards aren't just one-year boards. At the Niagara Regional Native Center, I'm on the board for 2 years. For the City of St. Catharines, I'm there for 4 years. For the advisory committee I sit on, it's an indefinite time, right? It's an appointed position. So as long as I'm doing my job and as long as I'm showing up and coming prepared, is as long as they're going to have me on. So yeah, it's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. Chris?
Thanks, Zach. So not only do I have to go last after everyone espoused brilliant advice to folks, I've also got to try and not retrace over what I said on the last question and overtook this question before you asked it. So I think I'll go in a slightly different direction here, and I'll talk about how passion is critical to your longevity on a board of directors. So typically for a governance board in the nonprofit sector, you have terms that are 2, maybe 3 years, and they're typically renewable 2 or 3 times, which means a board commitment in time of 6 to 9 years is not atypical for a board structured term plan for its members. So now you need to ask yourself, in terms of your passion, do I have a passion for this project that runs so deep that I can last through all of the trials, tribulations, pitfalls, things that are going to happen as part of this board experience that's going to last me out to that time? And then critically, do I understand my own passion well enough that if I get into that space, I can recognize when I need to step away because it no longer meets what I'm looking to achieve and to accomplish. So for example, I joined the board of CMHA Niagara in March of 2015. I had just suffered the worst crisis of my life. I tried to take my own life twice before that point. And CMHA Niagara, I had applied to be on their committee the year prior, and then they sent me a notice being like, hey, do you still want to be on our board? Please join our board. And so I joked today that CMHA actually saved my life, though probably not through the way that they intend their programs to. I don't think they intend for the board to be therapy wise. And so I joined their board. I've served as their treasurer. I've served as their vice chair. I've now served as their chair. And as soon as you move into the role of chair, you actually light the fuse respectively for when you're going to leave that organization. Because the chair's term is 2 years. I'm coming up to the end of my term as 2 years. Often on a board, the chair or president will serve as a past chair or past president for a year. But then after that, you need to think about how you've given everything that you could give to this organization, right? You've done the whole gauntlet of leadership. You've given all of the passion that you have. Now there's a new set of people who are more energetic, chomping at the bit because you've brought them on and their journey is only just starting. And so you have to recognize, when am I more in the way now in this project that I'm so dedicated and attached to? Right? I could serve on the CMHA board for 9 years, right? I am eligible until 2024, I think is how math would work out on that. But the question is that still the right thing for me and for the organization? So you need to understand your passion well enough to be able to leave the cards at the table and walk away and know, you know what, actually now there's great people that have followed me on the board, or I've recruited new people on the board, and now I can see their passion and their drive for this project. That's going to carry it past the next hill and not me. So yes, like understanding your passion and being passionate about the product is important when you get on the board. It's equally as important when you get there and understanding where you want to go. Because if you're already asking the question of, oh, like maybe I could leave early and not do it for the full 6 years, that's not the board to be on. That's not the right space for you. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. So now that would kind of wrapped up the end of our preset questions. And so thank you so much to the attendees who have asked some questions already. And if anyone else has questions, please do take the time to ask them. And so I'm going to kind of split it up here. So for our first question, I'm going to ask Madison and Sean to answer. And that question is, where should someone look to join a board of directors, and how can they find opportunities that exist in the community?
It's a great question. I'll speak to my own experience just because that is what I know. But for me, it was just getting involved. I started out volunteering for various committees that I would either find out through work, through school, through online searches. There's actually quite a few places online that you can find different volunteer opportunities. And that, again, I kind of spoke to building my network, but that did build my network. And then people ended up either nominating or referring me, or even asking if it was something of interest to me. And it oftentimes was. So it did for me start with volunteering, getting involved in different things. And again, I sound like a broken record here, but finding what I was passionate about. And that's kind of where I honed in on, for me right now is truly tourism and the wine industry. So both the boards that I'm sitting on right now are very fitting for where my passions lie right now.
Great, thank you, Madison. Sean?
Yeah, very much like Madison. It's really about finding your passion and understanding what motivates you. Again, there is a significant amount of time that is supposed to be dedicated to these organizations that we want to serve on and give our time to. And oftentimes these come without per diems, or they come without any formal pay. Sometimes if you have children, there might be issues with childcare, transportation, so on and so forth. So understanding your passion is a good starting point. And then aligning that passion with organizations or city committees too. That also makes sense, right? So, I mean, if you're a sports guy, I would imagine that there are boards of directors for varying sports groups. The St. Catharines Minor Lacrosse Association, as an example, has a board of directors. Most sports clubs have boards of directors that you could associate yourself with. The City of St. Catharines puts on community information settings for the committees that you could potentially serve on. So when I first got interested in participating in a city level in a more formal capacity, I went there. I was back in the university days, got on my bus, took it all the way down in the middle of winter, and went to these various booths to gain some interest. What does it mean? What am I getting myself into? What is a recommended experience, so on and so forth. So my recommendation, very much like Madison, is understand your passion and then apply that passion to potential boards that do exist. So Niagara Regional Native Center, again, me being Indigenous, is a natural fit for me. So.
Thank you, Sean. So our next question will be for Julie and Chris. How long, in your experience, are typical commitments for board of directors? What is the typical term as a board member? And if you're in a position where you feel like you need to exit, what do you feel is the best way to handle that sort of situation? We'll start with Julie, please.
So I've been on the YW board this is my 5th year now. So our terms are, I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's 2 years. I've been reelected 3 times. So, and Chris alluded to this earlier. Each organization will have a term, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 4 years, and the bylaws will outline that term and then how many times you can be reelected. And I really like what you said, Chris, too, about the perspective of the review committee or the executive when they're recruiting for the board, is to think about, you know, when we're inviting someone to join our board, can we see them in a leadership position for the long term? So we want to think about that. You're not just coming for a 2-year term or a 4-year term, although things change, circumstances change, and sometimes folks' commitments have to end early. But you really want to think about being there for at the minimum your term. Now, I've been around for some time now, and I am now currently on the executive. So I think that's important to have the experience serving on the board and with your fellow directors, and then to be able to move into that executive role. We also have a past president who I believe is on the call tonight, Lori, who her term as the board president came to an end, but we have this past president role. So she's continuing, and I look to her for mentorship and leadership as we continue to, as she's continuing on the board in the future. So again, I think you need to be able to make a commitment. And this, we've talked about the importance of passion for commitment, but not only for the organization, but for your professional development too. Like we've talked a lot about the importance of passion, interest in the issues, but we're also here because we all want to contribute and develop our skills too. And I'm not going to shy away from that. It's important to me to utilize what skills I have and my expertise, and to continue to grow that, because it's an area that I want to continue to learn and grow. So if you're not willing to put the time and the investment in to learn and to get better, then I really don't know what the point of being there is. So you got to be able to commit for at least the term. And I think you had another question that I didn't answer, Zach, but I know that Chris will.
No, that's okay. I think that you did kind of summarize both
Okay.
well. Thank you, Julie. Yeah, Chris?
Again, following Julie, and I'm going to attempt to make something sound reasonably eloquent in the space that's been left for me. So I think, when you're looking at a board, you're looking at committing to a board, identify what time that you have available to you within a month to be able to contribute to that piece. I alluded in my presentation at the beginning that 8 to 10 hours is not an unreasonable amount of time. If that's something that you can't do, don't feel as though that means that you're precluded from getting involved in things. You can be involved in committees, you can be involved in events. Like, there's lots of other lower threshold pieces. It doesn't need to be the board. And it can work up to the board once the time becomes available to you to do those pieces. To the question around, what do I do if I realize that, hey man, I'm over in my head and I need to kind of bail on this project? As a chair and as having been on a number of boards where this has happened, identify it as soon as possible and identify what the restriction is going to be. So if it's, I need a couple meetings off because of this situation that's arrived, that's okay. Normally the chair of the board can work with you around it. Can you see it out to the remainder of your term, right? Normally for boards, if you've got an AGM at a set date every year and you recruit in advance of that AGM, can we hold you in that position? Can you still contribute something until that AGM date? And that's when you step away. So those are pieces to consider as well. To jump back, Zach, I'm going to do this really, really quickly to your previous question. Places like Charity Village, Volunteer Match, Volunteer Niagara are all great places to look or to start looking for board opportunities. I'll say those again: Charity Village, Volunteer Match, and Volunteer Niagara. Those are all great places to start. The other place to start, honestly, and I think some of my best board experiences have come this way, are I'm just looking on the internet for agencies that fit my passions and my goal. I look at their website, and sometimes they post because organizations don't have the money to post on these external sites, and so they only post on their website, and you find a posting. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes I just shoot a message to the executive director and be like, hey, I want to be involved in your organization. What do you got? Is the board free? You got board spots available? And sometimes I know of boards that I serve on, we hold seats open all year long because someone resigned or whatever, and we're waiting for the AGM. We're not actively recruiting for it. But if someone came through our door and said, hello, consider me for the board, we'd be like, oh, sweet, let's take a look at this person, right? So sometimes it's just being forceful, bold, going and jumping in that spot. And if they say, no, sorry, we're not recruiting, you reply back with, yeah, but you got any committee spots available though? Like, what do you have? I'm interested, right? And rare is it a nonprofit that I know of that would ever turn away a passionate volunteer. So start from that place. That's how I started at the CMHA board, was on a committee. They saw my intention, my involvement, my passion, and they were like, okay, let's bring them up to the board as soon as we've got a spot. Because in that case, I applied for the board and wasn't successful in 2014. And later I found out it's because they only had one opening and they had 10 people apply for it. And so they had 3 or 4 other really strong candidates, all of whom got on committees and ended up getting on the board at a later date. But at the time, there just wasn't enough spaces available. So consider all of those pieces are at play and behind the scenes, and never feel discouraged and never feel afraid to just reach out and be like, hey, I want this thing. What do you got?
That's
Awesome.
what I did.
Yeah, please go ahead, Julie. Oh.
That's what I did. I reached out. I said, I'm really interested. I have this idea, and I'm still here like 6-7 years later. So that works. And I also am going to say, I fully support your approach there, Chris. And that's how we've got some of our new board members. We just appointed 5 new board members at our AGM, and some of them reached out through the year. Hey, I'm interested. Let me know when, and we'll hold on to that interest. And we are also going to be opening up our committees to non-board members for that reason, because we want to train and recruit and involve more folks, and then eventually move them into the board when there's an opportunity. It's good for succession planning. It's great for the organization, grow our capacity, and be able to do more. So if you're interested in an organization, YWCA, contact us. And I know the same would go for any of the other organizations on here in the community too. Just reach out. Don't be shy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask this question specifically to Sean. And if you could talk, you had mentioned the importance of Robert's Rules a couple minutes ago. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the training that you would receive when you join a board of directors, and specifically about Robert's Rules or job shadowing, and how, or like, did you just learn on the job, or what was that training experience like for you?
Yeah, so for me, it was very much learn on the job, right? You've accepted this position, you've let your name stand at the annual general meeting, and here you are. But since my time on the board, again, our board composition is 2-year terms to a max of 3 times per term. So you could potentially be on the board for 3 years before you have to get off and take a break. But in doing so, we made the decision that learning on the job, while is fun, and it's good to watch people sink and maybe drown potentially, it's probably not the best use of our time. So we have established training that is available. Coincidentally, yesterday I was in board training for a good 3 hours. So it does exist. The Niagara Regional Native Center is very fortunate that we have a provincial body that we're affiliated with through membership, and they provide this training to us. So sometimes boards of directors have oversight bodies or administrative bodies that you have the ability to reach out to, and part of the onboarding that does exist is the overview of Robert's Rules of Orders. One thing you have to ask yourself is, when you get on the board of directors, are they going to do any sort of onboarding? Because that should exist. There should be some sort of overview or some sort of orientation as to what it means to be on the board of directors. Oftentimes, what I find is that the training may not be the best, but there are other agencies that are available. I think Chris alluded to some of the governance work that he does, that does exist. Boards of directors have the ability, boards of directors have the funds available to bring in consultants, to provide adequate training, to provide skill sets that you may not have, because sometimes the people that we get on the boards of directors are just well-intentioned people who want to create that positive change, who have no experience. And my job as a board member, as vice president, is to give them the tools and the skills necessary that they can be as successful as necessary. So if it means paying, hypothetically, Chris $5,000 to come in and do training, then that's the skill, that's what we're going to do. So it's really about understanding what your board is able to offer. And if you find yourself in a position where you still are having more questions after said training, then feel free to reach out, because if you're having these issues, there's a good chance that other people are also having these issues.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. Madison, I'm going to ask you this next question. With your experience of sitting on boards of directors that have operated this past year during the pandemic, can you talk to us a little bit about the way that your groups have utilized online formats for governments, and if there are any unique skills or tools that, now that we're sort of operating in this online era, that you think might be important for people to consider or to utilize when they're applying or thinking about joining a board of directors?
Know how to use Zoom, and honestly, it's depending on the board right now. It's all different forms of video calls. None of us are meeting in person right now, and I don't know how long that'll go. But I know I was on a committee meeting on Tuesday for our concierge group in Niagara, and they were saying the remainder of this year would remain virtual unless anything dramatic changed. And I imagine that'll be the scenario for a lot of my boards. So knowing how to utilize these systems, actually turn your video on. I know during a regular workday, I'm not a huge fan of it. It typically slows my internet a bit, but while I'm in a committee, because we're voting on things, it's easiest if I can see everyone and you can raise your hand to agree to a motion. So I would definitely get comfortable being on video. Don't be afraid to speak up. It can be a little awkward on video calls sometimes, but I think people are starting to get used to it. Or if you're in a scenario where again, maybe it is your internet just won't comply if you're on video, utilize the chat function. And again, just similar to when you would be in person, it's just been a lot of virtual. So a lot of staring at screens, which I don't necessarily love. I like the human connection that I get when we're in person, but nothing for me personally, at least there hasn't been any major changes aside from switching to this virtual world. So just get familiar with the different virtual tools and keep up on your emails, because that's how a lot of the communication is happening for us right now.
No, thank you so much, Madison. And I was thinking about my own experience when I had joined NEXTNiagara last year in January, and I had our first meeting in February, and we were super excited, and I got to meet all these people, and I have never seen any of them since. So I have had a full online experience almost, and we have found some good ways over the last couple of months of how to kind of keep those conversations going. And in our experience, one of the big things was kind of breaking those discussions down into smaller groups. And over the last year, we've found the importance, I think, of having small subcommittee groups to kind of move discussion forward and then bring those discussions back to the board to update everybody, instead of sometimes we found it as a challenge to have those big group discussions of 19 or 18 people all at once. So yeah, thank you so much, Madison. Julie, I'm going to ask you this next question. As someone had asked that they were a relatively new board member, and sometimes they had found that the formalities of Robert's rules and having discussions could get in the way of having good discussions about issues. Can you give us some tips about how to kind of navigate that, but make sure that you are still able to speak up and interrupt, oppose, or agree in an effective way that kind of continues to have that conversation moving forward, but that you're comfortable with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wrote a note in the chat that I think it is useful to get a feel for the procedures. That is accessible learning tool for all of us that will really give you some really good and probably some not so good examples. So watch your local city council meetings. They're all being live streamed right now. If not on cable, they're all online. And municipal councils all use the same rules and procedures, and they get into some pretty meaty discussions and disagreements. So you can see then the procedural maneuvers that are utilized to get into those conversations and to get into some disagreements. Again, you'll see the good and the bad. So I think that's a good tool. And as well, citizen advisory committees. I know for the city of St. Catharines, which I'm most familiar with, those committees are also online. So it's not just councils, but it's volunteers as well. And Sean, I know that one example that you've talked about is the Equity and Inclusion Committee. Those committee meetings are live streamed. So that's a good way to watch safely at a distance the procedures and then how these folks get into discussions. And then the other thing that I just want to say, like, you have a chair, right? This is the chair's job, or the board president's job, is to guide the procedures and to facilitate the meeting in such a way that everyone has an opportunity to speak, to participate. And whether that's virtually now, whatever platform you're using, that's the chair's job. So if you're really feeling challenged or uncomfortable, speak to your chair. This is not something that's tricky and complicated. It's something that, you know, it's traditional, it's formal, but it's still accessible. And please don't be intimidated by Robert's rules or Bourneau's or whatever procedures that your organization uses, because there's so many resources. I'm sure just Google, go on YouTube, or just watch your city council meetings. They can be actually quite entertaining and some really good discussions. So don't be intimidated by the procedural stuff. And you'll get orientation as well.
Thank you so much, Julie. I think those are really great examples. Chris, I'm going to ask this question to you. And I love what you had talked about reaching out, even if it doesn't always look like there are opportunities available, and your bravery, I want to say, I guess, in reaching out anyways and creating those opportunities for yourself. Can you talk about some potential considerations to be mindful of when applying for boards of directors during COVID-19 and sort of taking advantage of the opportunities that might not always obviously exist?
So I think one of the things to be mindful of is that, I mean, COVID-19 has been disruptive for boards regardless of the industry that you work in. And depending on what kind of staff resources exist for an organization to support the board in their work will impact the board greatly. I mean, I know for, CMHA Niagara, we suspended board activities for 4 months at the beginning of COVID. We received regular updates from the executive director on the work that the organization was doing, but we didn't do board work because board work required staff work and there was no staff capacity to do any of those pieces. So if you're looking at applying to a board that is quite a working board or doesn't have is not fully in the governance space, I would say be mindful that where they may not be doing active recruitment, they may not have the capacity to do that piece right now because they're just truly overwhelmed with what this looks like, right? And so they may also not, I think one of the other things to be mindful of is that depending on the organization, they don't want to turn away the volunteer. I think I said that before, right? No organization wants to turn the volunteers away, but they may not have a spot readily available for folks. I think NEXTNiagara is a great example of this. In my year as chair, one of the things we struggled with was people who wanted to get involved but didn't want to be on the council, right? And we were like, well, what are the other opportunities for involvement here if you don't want to do this thing, right? And so be mindful that just because someone says, hey, no to this thing doesn't mean it's a no permanently or it's a no because of your qualifications or any of those pieces. It may be a no based on circumstance and context, and asking for more information when you do that, feel free to reach out for those pieces. Always look for the follow-up. No different than if you would apply for a job somewhere and you don't get the job. Hound the people that give you the no for information around why that you got the no, right? If I had done that when I first applied to CMHA, I would have realized that they're like, oh, this was their plan all along, right? I thought I just wasn't good enough to be on their board and I got thrown on a committee. And then afterwards they told me, no, we were just waiting for a spot so we could bring you on board. I'm like, that would have made me feel great. Why didn't you tell me that piece of information, right? So, be persistent in that pursuit of further information, because regardless of if it's positive, like the committee example I just used, or it's a negative being like, you know what, you're really not a good fit for us. Either way, great feedback for you and your approach to doing these pieces. And so in COVID-19, it's also crucially important to understand those, because the agencies themselves will be in spaces that may not be as readily suitable for those things, right? I mean, the hospital board, of which I am a part of, suspended its operations of its board yet again because, and here's an organization, it's an $850 million organization. The staff is not there to do the board work. And so we've got board governance is nothing if it is not reflexive and responsive. And so be conscious that when you're applying, you might not hear back really quickly. People are really, really busy. It doesn't hurt to do a genuine follow-up, a kind, hey, I sent an application some time ago, just want to know if you got it or if it got eaten by the interwebs, right? That's totally okay, but don't be too surprised if this process takes longer than it normally would. Did that answer your question, Zach?
Yeah, totally. That's good advice. Thank you so much, Chris. So just kind of to wrap up, and I love, Julie, what you had said about that last comment too, about volunteering and the importance that being on a board of directors isn't the only way to engage with an agency. And I think that is such an important aspect of being present. And I know that each of you had kind of talked about this, about being present and being involved in things that you're already passionate about. And then opportunities for board experience will arise from kind of putting in that time with an agency. And so thank you so much for highlighting that. Just before we wrap up, I just kind of wanted to provide one last opportunity to each of you, and I'll start with Madison. Just in 1 minute each, if there was anything else that you wanted to add or any messages that you wanted to leave with our group tonight.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I would say is, you're kind of taking the first step in being here tonight. So kudos to you in coming and enjoying the session and trying to learn from those of us who are in a position that you may be interested in. And then from there, find a mentor, find someone who maybe has similar values, or someone who you look up to and could want to be one day. Reach out to them, send them a note on LinkedIn, or see if you can find their email some way, and start that conversation. If you have any questions, I know a lot of people in these positions are always willing to help provide advice, because to Chris's point earlier, like we're looking to nurture and foster those next generations moving into these roles, so that we can continue to have excellent boards and excellent committees and see these organizations thrive.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Yeah, reach out, right? I mean, like Madison said, you're here for a reason, because you want to participate, you want to give back. And I would encourage you to do so. Being on a board of directors is a fantastic opportunity. At a young age, I was fortunate enough to be elected at a national level and had the privilege of traveling the country, right? The opportunity that has been presented to me simply because I had the courage to say yes is unmatched, and is very much on par with any sort of formal education that you could get. I mean, just sitting here listening to Chris, Madison, and Julie is again, a learning experience in and of itself. So be ready to take on challenges, be ready to make mistakes, and be ready to learn from those challenges and those mistakes that you made, and come on out, keep coming, right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. Julie?
Something I think I mentioned, but I'm just going to repeat because I think it's hugely important, is that different perspectives, diverse views are critically important for good decision making, for sound decision making, for evaluation. And I think that, you know, we've been having this conversation in our community, across the country, around the world, about the importance of having balanced representation at board tables. And I think we need to strive for that as the next generation of leaders and governance as well. So when you get there, look around and do what you can to ensure that the voices of the people that you're listening to are reflective of the organization that you serve and are different, and you're not hearing all the same things, because that is not good decision making, and that's not going to help your organization. And if you have a different point of view, speak up. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. Yeah, Chris, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just to say that, you know, I've now been doing boards for 10 years in various shapes and forms, and I'm getting pretty sick and tired of being the youngest person around the table. I'm getting pretty sick and tired of seeing the same game played by the same folks and the same actors without disruption to address the fact that particularly our generations experience the world entirely differently and have entirely different needs than the generations that come before us. So to Julie's point, like, now is the time for disruption, right? I mean, at 30, I shouldn't still be the youngest person by miles, right? Like, not even by a little bit, by miles on these boards. We need to get young people involved in those spaces. I'll say that in the case of getting involved, when you look at boards, like, I know that things look formidable, but from the other side, I'll tell you, we don't often get that many applications. So, like, don't look at this thing and be, oh man, all of these incredible people are going to apply for it and I can never compete. The application that doesn't get sent doesn't get the position. So honestly, apply for the things that you want to, because in many rounds of recruitment, there's only a couple applications that actually get filtered through, right? And boards often then have to hold seats open because they didn't get a quality application. So send your application through. I think probably goes true for any of the members of this panel. And I don't know if I'm stealing your thunder on this one, Zach, but I think we're all open to be reached out to if folks have questions after the fact. I'm certainly open for virtual coffee or whatever that looks like. But don't treat it as though this is a situation that you can't overcome and transfer the hurdle over. I think, you know, Miss Frizzle probably said it best, that, you know, make mistakes and get messy, right? So, like, just go after it and you won't get better at this thing. I'm not an expert at this thing. I'm just better than I was 10 years ago. You don't get better at it until you try and go after it. So be the Miss Frizzle in this conversation.
Thank you so much, everybody. This was a very insightful conversation that we had. The opportunity of listening to tonight. I almost contemplated leaving my video on because I feel like I just had a permanent smile the entire evening. It was wonderful listening to everybody. And even though I have had the privilege of participating on various boards, I feel like I still learned a lot. And it's always really encouraging to be around amazing, like-minded people and just hear about the really cool things that other people are doing in Niagara. So thank you so much, Julie, Chris, Sean, and Madison. You guys were fantastic this evening. And to all of our participants that are viewing from home, you might see everybody's friendly faces show up on the Next Niagara socials at some point, just so that we can continue the conversations that we've had tonight, perhaps expand upon some of the questions that were asked and do a bit more of a deep dive into some of our panelists' answers. So expect to see that maybe on some of our socials. You can find us at Next Niagara on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that jazz. Big thank you to Zach for hosting, moderating tonight. You did a wonderful job as well. Big kudos to you. And a special shout out as well to Savannah and Karina at the GNCC for helping us host everything on the back end. Super conveniently for everybody, as we're talking about board experience, I wanted to mention that Next Niagara is also in the process of recruiting for our Next Niagara Council members. Information, I believe, was actually just emailed out today. If you did not receive that, just make sure that you're on our email list. As a participant this evening, you will receive a follow-up email. So make sure that you join our email list and you'll hear about all of our future events, ways that you can get involved, all of that fun stuff in the Niagara area. Our next event that we're hosting as part of Next Niagara will be on Thursday, March 25th, and we will be having an honest discussion about racism in the workplace as part of our Next Niagara Real Talk series that we're hosting. And I believe that's about it for us. I hope that everybody had a great time this evening and that you learned something, you were inspired to get involved. And if you have any questions that were not answered, just feel free to give us a shout and we'll do our best to get them answered for you in a timely fashion. So thanks again to everybody who participated this evening, and we hope to see you at some of our future events. Have a good night.